true nature of my reality.
You gotta chill, man.
Everything we do matters.
You cannot ignore God's word without one day suffering the eternal consequences.
The truth will set you free.
What is your reality?
What am I supposed to believe?
Looking for truth.
And welcome to another episode of the Big Dig Live. I'm your host, Michael Stewart, with co-host Will King, and Liz will pop back in here in a minute. She had a little technical.
She disappeared.
Yeah, she'll be back shortly. Will, I'll talk to you for a minute. I guess, how was your past week or so, and what's been going on with you?
It's been good. We had Thanksgiving and busy time with the schools, getting ready for the end of the semester. But everything's been going well.
Good deal. Yeah, we did some traveling, went to Louisville and then to Alabama, and got to see family on both sides, and eat some good food, of course, and eat too much and sit around and hold your gut and say, oh, why'd I eat so much or whatever. That's usually how it goes. And but it was a good time for that and everything. And but we're back at it. A little.
Liz said if you'll join her, she can get in, I think.
What's that? Oh, okay. I got it.
There you go.
All right. One moment. I'll pick her up. There we go. Now there's Liz. Hello, Liz.
Hello.
She's back. Little housekeeping on the front end, just so we have everybody on the same page. First off, shout out to Nelda and Doc for being here. And then my mom also is here. And then maybe Aunt Eileen will come by, and maybe some others, hopefully. But the housekeeping is this. There will be no show next Sunday, which is December the 21st. No, I take that back. December the 14th. No show on December 14th. December the 21st, we will have a show. And then we'll be December 28th, there'll be no show. And then we'll get back on track, hopefully, for a good run on January the 4th. So no show on the 14th. A show we will have on December 21st. So we'll just go by that. And then be watching if you are on the Facebook. We try to post some stuff out there, and we'll try to keep you updated on when a show is or when a show isn't. But as of right now, December 14th, no show. December 21st, there will be a show. So we'll get that a rolling. I asked Will about it, and Liz, I asked you about how your week's been, and we had a week off there and all those things. So chime in and add what you want to.
You know how our sermon today was about peace?
Right.
Yeah. I was like, yeah. Then it's like, I got to say, adulting sucks. Jesus doesn't, but adulting does. And I told you, like, my computer, I was in the middle of editing photos. I did a photo shoot today, and then my laptop just gone. And so I had to rush it over to Geek Squad to see if they could salvage stuff. And then it's just an old computer, but they might be able to salvage my computer too. But it was a lot of money, and then we got like house issues, and so it's not been adulting fun. So it's been stressful the last 2 days.
Yeah, our heat went out. Was it Friday? Thursday into Friday. Luckily, it wasn't like 5 degrees outside, but it was chilly in here. And my wife had got up to go use the restroom, and she realized, like, man, it's cold in here. So she went to turn it up a notch or whatever and have it to click on, and it clicked, but there was no on.
Oh.
And so she had to take off a day and be here for the HVAC. Luckily, it was just fuses, one of those fuse packs that goes with that thing. And so we're back on track and back to heat. So, and just FYI for everybody, be watching the weather as we get closer down into the week. There's some really cold air that's coming in, and maybe some snow. We don't know for sure.
I
So
hope we have a white Christmas.
it'd be nice as long as we can get where we need to go, right?
We get one every 10 years in Kentucky, or it's like every 9 or 10 years we'll have one white Christmas. And
Yeah.
I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago we had a white Christmas, and it was a good white Christmas, but you couldn't go anywhere, but it was
Mm,
nice.
yeah. So I don't know, but a lot of people say we're due a big winter since we haven't had a big winter in a while. So we'll see how it all plays out. But just make sure that you take care of your pipes by turning your water on. Those things.
We gotta put covers over our faucets outside, Will. Dang
Yeah,
it.
yeah. We went and bought another one today. We're gonna
I forgot about that.
put on that. Yeah, definitely want to do that before those cold spells hit, and then leave a water running drip with your, if you can, with your cabinet doors open. They say
Yeah.
really good for it too. But anyway, there's your housekeeping and little helpful hints, hopefully, and everybody stays warm, we hope. And Will, do you want to I guess kind of do a little catch up on it? We come out of chapter 5. We finished it up last time, but I thought Will might he does a good job at kind of giving us a little brief overview, and then we'll jump into 6 here in just a second.
Sure. Big things in John chapter 5, Gospel of John, was the healing at the pool of Bethesda. And Jesus heals a man there and gets in trouble with the religious leaders. Once again, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because he healed this gentleman on the Sabbath. And, based on their man-made regulations and trying to interpret and understand and protect the law, they saw that as a sin. And so Jesus and the religious leadership end up in this discussion, this direct discussion, and basically Jesus lays out, the gospel with them, and talked about that even if they don't believe him, they should believe what they've seen so far from the testimony of John the Baptist, the works of Jesus, the miracles so far, the testimony of God, like when Jesus was baptized, this is my son in whom I am well pleased. The testimony of the scriptures, if you search the scriptures, Jesus said you'll find it testifies about him. And these were the people that studied scripture the most. And we see that they kind of miss things. And then finally talks about Jesus does to the Jewish leadership the testimony of Moses, that Moses wrote about Jesus, and they have a choice to believe. And so anyway, that's kind of where we left off with John chapter 5. So.
Gotcha. And so tonight we get into John chapter 6, where in the first subheading is Jesus feeds the 5,000. So I will read it a little while, and as always, stop me along the way, and all that. Let me get it up on the screen. Aren't you proud of me, Liz? I remember.
Yes, I am. You get a star on your chart. Like, remember the Bible verse charts at
Yep.
Sunday school? You get a star on your chart.
There we go. So here we go. So this is John chapter 6. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread, so that these people may eat?" And he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself.
Yeah, let's stop there.
Okay.
So, I don't know if you have that map.
Yep.
Michael.
I can get it up. Hang on a second. There we go.
But so we had the healing at the pool of Bethesda. And you see that up in the top right, the northeastern part of the map here. And then it tells us that in John 6, they crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. They kind of went by both names. This region is called Galilee. Tiberias was a city on the Sea of Galilee named for a Roman emperor. So it's kind of used multiple ways, Sea of Galilee, Sea of Tiberias. But where they end up is kind of like what today is called the Golan Heights. And it's a very high, like mountainous region of Israel. And so you see that there where we've got on the far right, on the eastern part of the Sea of Galilee, the feeding of the 5,000. What's cool is this is the only miracle that's mentioned in all 4 of the Gospels. And the only other thing, but besides the resurrection of Christ, obviously, that's mentioned in all 4 Gospels. But this is the only miracle outside of that we have in all 4. And so, kind of Galilee is this. This is Jesus's, like, where his operation is. Most of the Gospel of John is centered around Jerusalem and the regions around it. So anyway, that's kind of the setting for John chapter 6.
Mm-hmm. Interesting too. That's going to be where the big battle at the end is fought, isn't it? Over around the Golan Heights, I think. Am I right about that?
I am not sure. That might be a Liz question.
What'd you say?
The final battle, isn't that around or
Armageddon.
near the Golan Heights?
I'm not sure.
I'm not
I know
sure
it's in a.
exactly. I may be wrong on that. It might be something maybe we can look up in a little bit. Yeah. So I mean, as usual, a large crowd is gathered around, where Jesus is. And so it's no different here. But it says that, 5,000, I think 5,000 men, I think is what they were first saying.
Yes, we may have had more people,
Yeah, because women and children.
women and children, it could have been double that. We don't know. And I like that Jesus sees the crowd, and then he asks Philip, where should we get bread for these people? And I like that, all the disciples kind of have their own gifts, their own like roles, like Judas is the treasurer. Philip throughout the Gospels is kind of like the logistic person. Like if you ever watched the show MASH, there was Radar. If they ever needed something, they would ask Radar, and he would work the radio to find it. So Jesus goes to Philip, and he's like, hey, where are we going to get bread? Philip's actually, according to history, is from this region. And, it's funny. Like, Jesus doesn't need Philip to get the bread. It tells us there that in verse 6, he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. I think that's important for us to remember as believers, that God can always just get the job done, right? But when God moves, it can be for our education and for our teaching. And he wants our involvement as well, you know? He could have
Right.
just produced bread, could have tapped a rock like we see in the Old Testament, brought forth water, brought forth bread, you know. But he goes to a disciple and this whole lesson here is gonna be to teach, constantly saying to teach the disciples. And that's kind of what we see here.
Okay. Any other comments on this section?
Yeah, I will. So I was reading this, it was maybe about a year or two ago, and there are some key words in here. Jesus commands them, have the people sit down in verse 10. And then it said, you see where he gave thanks before he did anything, which is a habit he does, is always um, recognizing God before he does stuff. But the the key verse right here, it is in 11, and it says he distributed to them, to those who were seated.
Hmm.
And so I was really dwelling on that, and I was like, well, why is it important that they were seated and they were in a position to receive? So it says that he only gave the food to those who were seated, not the ones that were standing or probably milling around. It was to the ones that were seated. And to me, that really showed me a lot. It says he gave them as much as they wanted. Um, and then there was stuff left over. And isn't that how it is in our life? That how many times do we just sit down and wait to receive?
Mm.
And that's what he commands us to do, is to be still. And when we're still and we're seated, we are in a humble position and we're willing to receive whatever he wants to give us. And then when he does give it to us, he usually gives it in abundance. So that really taught me a lot about positioning. Um, how are we positioned, at least spiritually, in our heart? Are
Mhm.
we obedient? Are we ready to receive? And because it says that it basically, he only gave to the ones that were seated,
That's what it
not the
says.
others.
That's what it
So
says.
that's something that really hit me in this passage, and I thought I would share that,
Mhm.
what God had showed me about the importance of the seating in the feeding of the 5,000, because in order to be fed, they had to sit down.
Good point.
Catch. Verse 7 says that Philip told Jesus, we only have 200 denarii. I looked that up, and in this time period, that's like 7 to 8 months of wages for a working man.
Mm.
Which immediately it tells us in verse 7, it would not be enough to even get a little for everybody. Like, it's not enough money to buy bread for everybody. But then the bigger problem is there's no like bakery that can supply enough, on hand. But
The masses there.
right. And that's not how Jesus does. Jesus doesn't feed everyone a little. He
Yeah.
always gives plenty, and we're going to see that here in the story. I like verse 8 too, like Andrew, one of the disciples, and every time we see Andrew in the Gospels, he's always introducing somebody to Jesus. So Andrew is the one that introduced Simon Peter to Jesus.
Oh,
Andrew
wow.
was,
I said, wow.
Later
That's
in the
cool.
scripture, we'll see Andrew bring some Greeks to Jesus, and here Andrew is the one that finds this young lad and brings him to Jesus. So we were just talking about Philip, being the logistics person, and Judas the treasurer. Andrew's kind of like one of those, fishers of men. He's like that bridge that brings people in the Gospels, introduces people to Jesus. And I was looking up, like, it talked about the boy had 5 loaves, and apparently a loaf back then is not like when I think of a loaf, I think of like sourdough bread, like a big loaf, like they bring you at the restaurants where they bring you out the bread and like maybe is it Outback? Maybe they bring you bread.
Yeah, I think so.
I
Mhm.
think like 5 of those, right?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out like apparently like it's like 5 pieces of like pita bread, flat bread. And
Like Nan,
yeah,
Naan or whatever.
and 2 fish, and like we're talking like sardines, like small fish. So and then we got the 5,000 men that are seated here. So yeah, we're set up for a big miracle here. It's not a big issue to Jesus, but
I got it.
the disciples really don't know what's about to happen.
There, my mom said, was there no women and children? There were women and children, as far as what we know. But when it talks about the 5,000, it's talking about, I think, just the men.
Right, right.
So the feeding of the 5,000 per se could be even a greater number if you connect some of the women and the children to those men as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I can't see anybody, so I'm gonna try to do it by. It had 12 left over, and so I was just thinking, well, what's the significance of 12 baskets? 12 symbolizes in the Bible divine order, perfection, and completion. But also, think about it. There were 12 tribes of Israel,
Yep.
so there was leftovers. To me, in a sense, 12 disciples, 12 tribes. That one for each tribe was like, I don't know, but it just I found that really cool that it had to be 12.
There's
Divine
definitely
order, perfection, and completion.
a lot of connection with the numbers, the perfect number, which is what, 7, I think and then 12. So yeah, definitely there's a definite connection there for sure. Let's see. Yep. I was making sure we've any
And
comments. We've hit those up, so we're good
it
there.
tells us that in verse 12, and when they had eaten their fill, like in that day and age, that was to eat as much as you want was unusual. I think that's something we forget in 2025. If we go back 100 years to the Great Depression, or 90 years to the Great Depression after the stock market crash, I think if you talk to our grandparents and our great grandparents, it's something I noticed growing up. Like there was no waste. Like people didn't,
Right.
It was just there was never enough. It was to have 3 meals a day was unusual, and so even with these 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish, Jesus provides enough that they have their fill, and there's even leftovers.
You know what? Talking about that, in the angle that I came out with, you think about that when we get our fill, or when we sit down and we're seated and we receive from God, those baskets could be people where what we have overflowing out of us will fill other people or other baskets,
Mm,
you know. And it in one thing it says that nothing may be lost. I find that very interesting. Gather up the leftovers fragments that nothing may be lost.
mhm.
And how, if we look at the baskets, or that is people, it's really interesting. I'm just going at it from an angle here, but
Yeah.
when we get filled and we overflow with God, we start filling other people. God uses us to fill others.
Well, it's
you
like
know
that little song that used to be sung, "I got a river of life flowing out of me," you know? Um, that's just what comes to mind when you said that, and, are we overflowing? That's the question I think that we have to all, pose to ourselves as we read this, from that angle you're talking about, Liz, is
Mhm.
are we overflowing? Or, um or
Do we
not?
sit to be filled? Do we sit to be
Do
filled?
do
I
we
mean,
seek that? Yeah, is that something that's is that our desire? And so, that's a good point for
But on
sure.
the flip side of that, are we having the attitude of Philip? Like, everybody's just going to get a little, maybe. Everybody's just going to get a little Jesus. But Jesus on the other side is like, I'm going to feed them and provide as much as they want until
Mhm.
they're full. And then there's going to be leftover. And we're not going to we're going to make sure that's gathered up and not lost, like generous, but not wasteful. And so I think that the attitude of being a giver, like good stewardship, and
Mhm.
there's a verse, Proverbs 11:24. One person gives freely, yet gains even more, and another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty.
Mm. Let that soak in a minute, right?
Jesus had the disciples scatter the bread, and it just increased and increased and increased till there was
mhm,
everybody was
multiplied.
fed and had their full, and there was leftover.
Well,
This reminds me of the story in I guess it's Second Kings where Elisha went to a widow's house during a famine, or was it Elijah? And the widow had nothing, and she's like, "I'm about to just." He's like, "Feed. Can you give me something to eat?" She goes, "Well, I don't have anything. I have just enough flour and oil for me to make something for me and my son, so we could die." And he says, "If you feed me now, you will never run out until this famine's over of the oil and the flour." And she was obedient and she did it and she never ran out. Her thing was always full and she never ran out of the oil or the flour to make. So I find that this kind of relates to that a little bit, that God, when it comes to us and those who serve him, you know, he doesn't let us, go hungry, I guess you would say.
he takes care of his kids.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
And so hungry people are fed, the disciples are taught, tested, trained. I think they learn a big lesson from this. There's leftovers that are going to be used later. And like I
And
said,
two fish.
this is told to others. This word spreads. This is the only thing outside the resurrection that we have in all four gospels. And we see the result, Jesus is kind of glorified. Now, the people take a different track on that than what Jesus wants, and he explains that. But so far in the Gospel of John, we've had the water turned into wine. We've had the royal official's son healed from a distance. We've had the paralytic at Bethesda healed, who'd been invalid for 30-something years. And now we've had the feeding of 5,000 plus with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish.
Do you think those fish might have been like sanctified or something? They went to heaven and watched themselves being distributed to thousands and thousands of people. I'm just saying that from a funny point of view, but you
Mhm.
know, those fish are like, wow, look what I did. Or look what God did with me.
Yep. Yep. For sure.
And all this is going to lead later in this chapter, and we may not get to it tonight, but it's going to lead to a great speech that Jesus gives about him being the bread of life. All in the same chapter. I don't think that's a
Yep.
coincidence,
No,
Yep.
it's not. And
Mhm.
and you know that he was born in Bethlehem, the house of bread. That's what Bethlehem is the house of bread. I found that pretty cool.
Well, it's interesting too. He talks to the lady at the well. He's the living water,
Hmm.
and now he's talking about he's the bread of life. And what are the two main ingredients that a human being needs to live? Food and water.
You're like 70% water is what a human being is.
Yeah,
That's
but
what I think.
food and water are two essentials
Yeah.
to survive. So
But
it's
well,
how
we're
it's,
not in that part yet.
how it's all
So,
woven together.
yeah.
All right, let's move on down here.
But once again, we see the people, just like often the Jewish leadership, they get confused with verse 14. When the people saw that what he had done, they said, "This is the prophet who's coming to the world." And verse 15, perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew to the mountain by himself. So to the people, this gets their attention. This is reminiscent of the Old Testament, where Moses feeds the people with manna. And there were some rabbis that taught back then that when the Messiah would come back, he would re-implement manna from heaven.
Mm.
And so they're excited. They're like, heck yeah, like this is the prophet. He's giving us bread and fish. If we go to Deuteronomy 18:15, says, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him, for this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, 'Let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see this great fire anymore, for we will die.' And the Lord said to me, 'What they say is good. I will raise up from them a prophet like you,'" like Moses, "'from among the fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. And he will tell them everything I command, and I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name." So
Why do you think they are so hung up talking about the people? They're so hung up on the prophet versus the coming Messiah.
right. Well, they have an odd view of they're under Roman authority right now. Like they have Jewish leaders, but they can't do anything unless the Romans allow it. And so they're hungry for the prophet or the Messiah or someone to throw all this off. And so Jesus senses that. Like they want a king, but a king is a political title.
Right.
They want somebody to overthrow the oppressive government. And, I have to think that Jesus regards this as a temptation, like the temptations in the desert, temptation from the devil. Like, here's a worldly kingdom. We'll give it to you.
It's an idol.
And Jesus is like, nope, I'm leaving. I'm departing. I'm going to go pray. And he senses that. But the people are confused because they're hungry. They're hungry for bread, but they're also hungry for this this political change. And that's not why Jesus has come.
And that's one thing a lot of people want to sit there and make Jesus a social Jesus, that they take the Beatitudes and they twist it and make it all earthly. And the Beatitudes is completely spiritual, and he came for kingdom purposes. He came for eternal life things, not physical. I mean, he did heal physically and stuff like that, but his message was about not the earth, but it's about, my kingdom and your eternity and spiritual things. And it's hard. Like, remember what Steve preached about today. It's like we just get focused on ourselves and what we're going through and everything, and it does the one thing: it steals the peace. We are not in a society that is, let's give it all to Jesus. Let's, be with him and seek him on everything. And yeah.
I think you're right, Liz. Like the social Jesus, social justice. And we see that later in the Gospel of John, where Jesus himself says, "The poor you'll always have the poor with you, but you've only got me here for a little bit."
Yeah.
And it's we're talking about worldly, materialistic, kingship, whatever, worldly king versus spiritual, eternity, spiritual king. And that's the thing that people miss here because they've got their bellies full. And so I think this is a lesson to the disciples. Like, because maybe some of the disciples were like this. We know some of the disciples came from, groups that wanted to overthrow the Roman government and wanted the Messiah now, and so if there were still some of the disciples that were harboring those feelings, that's not what I'm here for. My kingdom is eternal. It's not temporary to overthrow the Romans.
All right. That's a good little passage there for sure.
You know, I
Go
got
ahead.
something here in my Bible, and it says they were about to come and take him by force to make him king. Jesus withdrew. I've got a note here, and it says we cannot force God to do our will. And how many times do we try to force God or Jesus to do what we want or what our will is, you know, and then we get angry when he doesn't, if we're really sure and we don't, when we don't get it. Some, you know, some people like they'll manipulate Jesus or God. They
Mm.
only talk to him when they need something. And then when he doesn't give what they want because it's not what they need, they turn against him.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that really interesting from a spiritual point, is we can't force God to do our will, and because it's our will and not his, and they were wanting their will and not his.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Jesus walks on the water. I'll read that little section and then we'll talk about it. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the Sea of Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going.
That's a cool verse.
Mm-hmm.
They teleported. They got immediate, the moment he put his foot in thing, they were on shore. That just trips me out. I think it's awesome.
I didn't catch that until this now. Yep, you're right.
Yeah, the Sea of Galilee is like 700 feet below sea level. So we're not terribly far from the Mediterranean Sea. So it's important to know that storms would happen a lot in this area. Like the winds would come off the Mediterranean, go over parts of Israel, then hit this drop, and it would stir up winds and storms. And here we've got the disciples going across from the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee to the western shore. And it says here in John, the disciples went down the sea and got into the boat without Jesus. In the Gospel of Mark, it tells us Jesus compelled them like to get in the boat and go. Kind of right when the crowd was coming for Jesus, you know. So it's interesting to see this from the different Gospels. But this is the second miracle we see in the 4 Gospels on the Sea of Galilee. Does anybody remember the first? We didn't see it in the Gospel of John, but it's in the other 3.
Oh, was it the fish?
No. Like out in the middle of the water.
Well, Peter walked on the middle of the water, and then there was the one where he's in the waves and everything, where Jesus said, "Peace, be still."
Yes. So in the 3 Gospels, we have the storm, Jesus in the boat asleep, and stays asleep, and the disciples freak out, wake him up, and he stills the storm. This is the second miracle we see on the Sea of Galilee, where they're out there by themselves. The sea's become rough. They've been rowing for a long time. They're not going anywhere. And then they see Jesus walking on the water. And in some of the other Gospels, we see Peter step out towards Jesus. We don't see that in the Gospel of John. But yeah, they're freaking out. I think they're tired. They see Jesus, but he comforts them, tells them, you know, don't be afraid.
Are they frightened because they see him walk on the water, or are they frightened?
Well, another version says they thought he was a ghost. So, like, these are different viewpoints. So we're getting John's viewpoint and John's testimony. So each of the Gospels, they're the same story, but they're from different
Angles.
perspectives and different writings. So one will leave something out, and the other will add something like this is also where Peter walked on water. But it's just John is just tackling what he thinks is important.
Right.
Although I think Peter walking on water is pretty freaking awesome. But Jesus walking on waters, period, is awesome. But it's just a different the writers just wrote about different things that they saw that they wanted to talk about. So you have
Mhm.
Matthew, Mark, and John talking about the perspectives of they're the ones that they wrote about certain things that happened at this during this event and during this, it's just different eyewitness accounts,
I
just
think
Mhm.
different
I, th-
perspectives.
I think you're right, Michael. I think they, they've they've been out in the water. Some of them are fishermen. They're used to storms and stuff. But the fact that they see Jesus walking on the water, I think you're right. Like that would freak any of us out in the middle of the night. We look over and we see somebody walk in the water because we've never experienced that before, and I'm sure they had never experienced it before.
I
Well,
don't think
probably
anybody
if
has.
it's below sea level, and we mentioned the wind and such, and the storms that pop up. But I bet there would be some fog.
Yeah. Well, like I said, they're tired. It says it's nighttime. This is after the feeding of the 5,000. Um,
And you
I,
might hear the little squish, squish
yeah,
as
yeah.
he's walking on top of the
I
water.
think they're exhausted. They're hungry. They're afraid just being in the storm. They're ready to get to the other side, and seeing Jesus with all the weather and everything is just a whole nother level of that. But
And this is, if I'm understanding correctly, this is the evening after he has fed the 5,000 plus.
yeah, it's that night, and
So, I
and
mean,
they knew they got in the boat by themselves, and Jesus had gone off to pray, like he does so often. So
I'm just thinking,
turn
well,
around and see him out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee.
They weren't expecting him to be just walking around on the
Right.
water.
I would say
well,
any of us would be freaked out. Like
what I'm thinking about is though, okay, so they saw him do this miraculous miracle with the loaves and fish. And so, as far as shouldn't they have an expectation, in a sense, that this man Jesus, the one they're following, should it really
controls everything.
should it really surprise them that he came in there walking on the water? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean,
It's just interesting.
Jesus didn't tell him, I'll be meeting you out there in the water or whatever. Or
Right? He
maybe
didn't say
they thought
that.
he was going to get another boat. So maybe they were thinking probably another boat. They wouldn't be expecting a human walking on the water
Right?
by himself,
True.
just la di da di da. I mean,
It's just neat,
It-
when you think about it, and you think about what our perspective. It's like if we're on a pontoon boat over at Barren River Lake, and one of our friends starts coming to us from across the lake, walking on the water. That'd probably be a little freaky,
Notice the way he
and plus
says
when
it
you're, yeah,
in verse 20. He doesn't just say, like, fear not or don't be afraid. In the Gospel of John, he says, it is I. Like,
I
it
am.
reminds me of like the I am. Like, I'm exactly who I say I am. I'm who I've always said I am.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be surprised. But I would say if we were out there, we would be super surprised because we've never seen that before. Jesus operates outside of our boxes, and that's what we see with the rabbis. Like he
Mhm.
operates outside of their man-made rules to heal
Yep.
on the Sabbath or to walk on water.
And I think one thing you're seeing here too, he's operating on his creation. Like right there, it should totally say who he is, that he was the one who created it because he is able, it's his creation. It's his, you understand what I'm
His
saying?
water, it's his Sea of Galilee. It's his.
He spoke everything to an existence in every molecule, every atom he has control over. And
Mhm.
so it's his creation and he's walking on his I mean, it's just should take it to a whole nother level that he can, what science says should not be possible. God's saying, I'm saying it is possible because I am.
I am.
Something to think about beyond this story, especially with verse what's verse 21 here? Then they were glad to take him into the boat, so they received him, and immediately the boat was at land to which they were going. And a lot of people miss that, but instantaneous. And so, is that what it's like for us when we die? We
Ooh.
work our entire life. We have struggles like the disciples are struggling here. I imagine them. They've had to take their sails down. There's a storm if you've ever been in a sailboat, and they're having to row by hand together. And I'm sure that the disciples are not always people that work together. They're 12 individuals. So, and they're tired. It's dark. They're toiling away, but then immediately they're with him and where they're going. And so when we pass away, we're immediately with him in heaven.
It says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. But I got a really cool thing from this, and it says, that they were rowing continuously. They were doing everything on themselves and fighting the sea, fighting whatever, and they weren't going anywhere. They weren't able to get anywhere. And how much is that of our life? Like in our situations, in our hardships or whatever, we try to do everything. We're the ones fighting. But was the moment when they invited Jesus into their boat, into their situation, if we think of it at our lives immediately, they there it's a difference immediately when you let Jesus and invite him into your boat or your situation.
There's a comment in the chat from Nelda.
Mm-hmm.
Says, don't miss that once the disciples were willing to receive Jesus into the boat, he dealt with their problem, which was being out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee in a storm, and delivered them where they needed to go, where they were needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jesus walked to them in their situation too. They were stuck basically. And
something
Jesus
for
went
us
to
to
them.
remember when we're in situations that are difficult.
He comes to us.
Yep. For sure.
Delivers us. And that was part of the scripture today in at least at the 9:30 service that we attended,
Mm-hmm.
God delivering us.
Yeah, and you sit there and you think about Egypt too, and I, for some reason, the Prince of Egypt song "Deliver Us" is running through my brain right now.
Hmm.
But Jesus heard their cries, and because of that, sent a deliverer, and he is there for not only the brokenhearted, but the humble, uh, and he wants to be involved in all of our situations. We just have to invite him in.
Yep. I am the bread of life. That's the next caption.
That's a whole nother
Yep.
nother level.
Where
I
we
think we need to cover that next week.
Yeah, we're at 48 minutes. So, yeah, so we'll hold off there. Let me write down. This will be on December 21st. We'll pick up on this. And that will be John 6:22.
It's real interesting. The next time if you want to go ahead and read this section, or not us, but listeners,
Mm-hmm.
The next morning, the people are seeking Jesus again after the feeding of the 5,000. And, are they seeking him for more bread, more miracles? We're going to see that. And Jesus is going to kind of have another discussion with those people and kind of talk about that. But anyway, it's interesting. The whole chapter is interesting how we weave it, and like you said, the heading for this next section is the bread of life. So,
but if you think about it, in the very beginning of the script, it says they saw the signs. And how many times you think about nowadays, you have a world that is just so far from God, and a lot of people, Christian, or we'll say not, I don't know what you would call them, but people posing as believers and Christians with all these gifts and snake oil and all these signs that people haven't seen before, and everybody's flocking to those kind of things. It's, you live in a world, if you think about the Roman rule and how oppressed they were, let's think about nowadays how people are so oppressed spiritually.
Mm.
Um, and someone shows the chance of being able to restore someone or something, or restore your finances, or restore your health and everything. And people can either make a false claim, or there's some people that really do get healings and stuff. I am one of those people who has God healed. Um, but people will chase the gifts and not the gift giver. They'll chase the supernatural, but not the one who is supernatural, because they're thinking on a fleshly, earthly plane. They're not thinking about our internal spiritual health and kingdom, our destination.
There always
And
seems to be,
so,
they always chase what I consider levels. Like the, for instance, the certain, we don't call names, but there's certain ones out there that, are in the faith healing on TV. You've seen them,
yeah.
things like that. And people will flock to those folks instead of recognizing that, like you said, your healing, my healing for that matter, it comes from from Jesus himself.
And
Uh,
one thing God showed me with my healing is, at that time, I mean, I went through years of a hellish disease, and just every day, God, please let me die. I can't take this pain. I can't take it anymore. And I think it was around 2019 I started kind of really starting to get more in the word again and everything. And then in thinking around 2020, or no, maybe it's 2020, I started in 2021, I started really heavily pursuing God full force. Maybe it's 2020, I don't know. But God showed me when he healed me in 2022 of what it was. And he showed me in my brain, it was a wall with an outlet. And then I was a lamp with no light and a cord that was disconnected
mm,
from the wall. And he said, so Jesus was the plug, the wall was God, and the electricity running in the wall to the plug was the Holy Spirit. And God said, showed me the moment I plugged my lamp into Jesus and started really seeking him, and I connected with him, he came and went through me, and he began to heal me, but restore me, but make me new, and not in more than just physical, it was spiritual. And
mhm,
that's how he showed me, like, just with the woman who was bleeding for 12 years, she had to get on her hands and knees. She had to crawl. That's like humbling yourself. She fought the crowd, but she fought to get closer to Jesus. And through prayer and everything, we fight to get closer to God. And by her fighting and humbling herself and continuing to persevere through all the obstacles and everything, the moment she connected to Christ, his power went into her because she connected to Jesus. It
mm,
was because of her faith. And in our faith, we connect to Jesus. And as you spend time with God alone, he does start to change you molecularly, in a sense, spiritually and sometimes physically. And it's in
mhm.
being in the presence of God, being in a sitting position, waiting to receive whatever God has to give you. So that's what God showed me. So
Yeah, that's some good words for sure. Yeah, it turn, just like so many will turn to this or turn to that, um, thinking
they're looking for something.
they've tapped in. Well, they think they've tapped into the source, all the while they almost like a carbon copy or a cheap imitation,
Replica.
a replica,
Yeah, imitation replica. Yeah.
instead of it being the one Jesus Christ. You know.
That's why
Um,
it's so important to know your word, because a lot of people are getting deceived with doctrines because they don't know the truth. Like, one person could change one verse and take a verse completely in Wonkerville, and then they're like, oh, that's true, or it really didn't mean this, and yet it doesn't. The Bible complements itself throughout. It's consistency. So there
Mhm.
will be something. Well, there's like this diagram, and it has a picture where the Bible cross references, and it's different colors, and it's just insane how much it completely connects from a prophet 3,000 years ago. 3,000 years later, there's a person saying something God said, and it's consistent.
Mhm.
And I don't remember where I was going with this, but yes, but it's important to be in the Word of God and actually know it, because the Bible is the one word you can walk away from it and forget like very easily. And so we have to constantly be in it, because the enemy does this. He will give you 10 truths with one lie embedded in it. And when that
Mhm.
one lie is embedded, it is no longer the truth. And people will be deceived. The Bible says people will they will be destroyed because of their lack of knowledge. And if you don't have the word in you, you're not going to be able to discern that one lie and realize something's off about that. That's
Right.
not the truth. And we have people running after the 10 truths with the one lie instead of the 10 truths.
Mhm.
So I think that's what's gone on with the world, because it's like we've gotten so far away from God. We think just because we go to church, or maybe that you're a good person and go to church, that qualifies you as a Christian. Oh, I know a few verses, but you don't read your Bible, you don't pray, you don't do that. You don't have a relationship, you have a religion.
Mm.
It is a relationship. If I sit there and I told Will, well, I'll see you on Sunday, I'll sit and look at you, and then it's like, and then people like, yeah, I got a relationship. That's not a relationship. I have to
Right.
sit with my husband and sit and talk with him, and I want to be with him, and get to know, like, I love knowing that my husband loves Legos.
Mhm.
And so surprising something with his birthday, it's Lego related, or that's the kind of relationship. I know things about my husband because I spend time with him.
Right.
I don't just sit there on one day or sit there and go, yeah, I know my husband's birthday is this day. I know him well. I mean, it
I
doesn't
heard
work that way.
one of the former pastors at Hillview said this one time. He said, it's kind of like this. It's talking about relationship with God. And he said, if you haven't talked to your, let's say someone you graduated with 20 years ago, and they called you up out of the clear blue, you didn't say their name, would you recognize who they are? And of course, everybody said, "Well, no." You see, exactly, and it's the same way with your relationship with God. If you don't spend time with Him, how are you going to recognize His voice,
Hmm.
right? And so, you've established very eloquently, but also in the Word, praying, connecting with as we call it, the Big Five, with to keep you alive, as we say, the prayer, the fellowship, the Bible study, the service, and all those things. Those need to be in our lives activated. And usually, if something's going wrong in your life, you can take a check of your Big Five and find out that something's not activated to where it should be. And it's like going. I don't understand people who don't want to go to church. I get it. People have got burned by the church, but at the same time, you know, it tells us to be assembled together.
Yeah.
And then also as we studying the Word and praying and worshiping and all those things, and those are things that we need. They're like it's just kind of like an allergy shot. It's
I think it's down to
we
pride
need
and
those shots.
selfishness.
We need those shots
Yeah.
activated in us. All the time. What was you saying, Liz? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry I interrupted. I think it's basically pride and selfishness. They could get up
Mhm.
early any other day of the week, but Sunday, damn, it's hard to get up. But well, some people I've heard, I don't need a church. I'm
Mhm.
fine on my own. I. You hear the I. And selfish with their time. They're very selfish with their time. Sometimes it's just laziness, but laziness is rooted in selfishness.
Mhm.
And selfishness is rooted in pride. And pride, I believe, is the key to every freaking sin. Every sin is. pride. That's
Mhm.
what caused Satan to fall from heaven. Pride. And I think everything you look, every sin is rooted in pride.
You're probably accurate with that. Yeah. I mean, you can kind of do a checklist of different sins if you want to, since you got a little time
Goes
off here,
back to
folks.
pride.
Just take a checklist on the sins that you can just name off the top of your head, and peel the layers back and see if it goes back to the word pride, because it probably
I
does.
want. I would like to know that. I find that
Mhm.
interesting because this is just in my thinking. Like everything that I've sit there, every sin, you peel it away, and when you get to the center of the onion, it's pride. So
Hmm.
knowledge. I want more knowledge. Pride.
Right.
What's the first word out of our mouths when we're babies? Mine, basically.
Yep.
Besides dada and mama, but it's usually as a 2-year-old or 1 or 2. All it is mine.
Mine. Yep. Good study tonight, guys and girls. We appreciate you coming in. Thank you for your comments and questions and different things like that. We appreciate those. Be reading on John chapter 6, as you can see on the screen. Well, not on the screen now, but here's the screen. This is where we're picking up next. I am the bread of life, which would be verse 22. So you can pick that up and kind of read the rest of the chapter. And if you come up with some questions on that or whatever, jot them down and save them for the time we get together again, because it's always good when we can have that type of interaction with you and all those things. Like I said, be in prayer for the weather. Everybody just pay attention to the weather this week, and be in prayer for as we're getting closer and closer to Christmas time and all those things. Just we're going to be with family and friends and different things like that, and we all should have a desire to show the love of Jesus to family and friends.
And I would like to also, my friend Jayana, right before we got on, my friend, she's 5 months, or no, she's 6 months pregnant, and she lost consciousness. She just passed out and lost consciousness. So she was being rushed to the medical center or something right before we got on. So if you could keep my friend Jayana and her little baby in the belly, Gideon, in your prayers, that would be amazing.
Yep. Definitely do that. There's definitely not a scarcity of things to pray for. That is for sure. There's plenty to pray for. And, but we can definitely be praying for her, and that everything is good there, and they figure out what went wrong, I guess you'd say, in that situation. And then all that as well. And hopefully everything will straighten out there. So having said that, so we will be back. I'll repeat this again. There will be no show next Sunday. There will be a show on December the 21st. December the 21st. And we will pick up at John chapter 6, verse 22. And then we will be basically the rest of the year, we're out. Of course, with the holidays and travel and New Year's and all that stuff. And then January the 4th, Lord willing, we'll be here for a show. And so we'll pick back up at that time. All right. Any final thoughts, guys, before we call it a night? Will?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, we appreciate you watching. And we are talking about also maybe, we're batting it around, of maybe going to 6 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. So we'll see if we do that. We just thought it might be a little better to kind of get off a little earlier from here, as we all, I know Will works in the school system, and I do, and my family does, and so forth. So, but we'll let you know on the Facebook page if we decide to pull that trigger or not, as we get closer to that and that decision. So everybody have a good week. Stay warm, stay safe, and we will see you next time on the Big Dig Live. See you later.